In this part of the world, we've been used to looking at and investing in early stage companies that wanted to, copy an existing business model from the Western world or from China and adapting it locally and regionally. The most audacious startups are the ones who try to disrupt a business model and those who try to build a global company.
What was your objective behind Middle East Venture Partners? How has the landscape changed since then?
Okay, back in 2010 when we launched our first fund, the objective was to take advantage of this early stage investment opportunity within the technology space. And the bottom line is to make money by investing early, harvesting late and growing those companies and exiting and making money out of those startups. And nobody else was around to invest in early stage startup back then, 2010. It was probably too early now looking back retroactively because the ecosystem started to grow in 2015. So we were kind of too early back then.
What influences your selection while building your portfolio? What drives your investment decisions?
So typically we look at a variety of criteria in a company we invest in, starting by the quality of the founding team and the size of the opportunity. It's very important to go after big opportunities. The more the company becomes complex, the bigger the checklist of stuff we look at. At a very early stage, the checklist is light. You're really looking at teams and size of opportunity and quality of the vision and the strategies behind that vision. And the bigger the company, start digging more into the numbers. So numbers matter, whether they're financial or operational. So it's really, it depends on the size. I think we've been investing in many companies over the years in many funds. Latest fund is called MEVP 3, Fund 3, that has invested in about 15 companies, if I'm not mistaken, in areas of logistics technologies, consumer internet, fintech, software as a service, and it's been a great actually portfolio and a great performance so far.
Which has been the most audacious pitch you have ever heard?
I wouldn't say there's one audacious pitch, but in this part of the world we've been used to looking at and investing in early stage companies that wanted to copy an existing business model from the Western world or from China and adapting it locally and regionally. The most audacious startups are the ones who try to disrupt a business model and those who try to build a global company out of Middle East, North African region, not just Egyptian companies. They usually look at the Egyptian market because it's such a large one. Same for Saudi companies. But in tiny countries like Lebanon and Jordan, sometimes we're lucky to find global companies, at least startups looking to address a global market and address a pain point on a global level. So this is the most audacious part.
What does the region need to focus on to ensure an attractive and competitive investment environment?
In this part of the world, the Stanfords and the MITs of the world are missing. So we have good engineering schools fostering good talent, but I wouldn't say global amazing level type of talent. But it's been better and better. So talent is number one. Dubai in particular has been great into attracting talent, global talent. Other cities like Abu Dhabi has done it as well. Riyadh and Cairo a bit less, much less actually. Other than that, what was missing was the money. Up until 3 or 5 years ago, there was very little funding for early stage innovation and technology investments, very little. This has been solved again in countries like UAE and Saudi, about to be solved in Egypt as it's growing. But you need talent and money. The infrastructure is there. The cloud is there, as Walid mentioned. the enablers are there. So I think it's only about talent, money, and a bigger market. It has to be, a MENA market or a global market.
What are some of the key sectors that are gaining traction?
I think what's interesting in this question is that there's always flavors in the digital and internet companies. So, for instance, 10 years ago, e-commerce was just starting in this part of the world, and then it had many variants, and then had another flavor of marketplaces, and then fintech companies, and then software as a service, and the flavors never really stop. A couple of years ago, we started seeing more blockchain and crypto-driven interest in companies. Now we see more probably applications in artificial intelligence and big data. But all of these flavors really don't take away from the bigger picture, which is internet usage and adoption and digitization is hitting every sector of the economy, of the traditional economies. So even e-commerce has a really long way to go, given how low its penetration rate is, and how companies and diversification it could hold. So I wouldn't say really there's flavors. I believe that in general, internet and digital companies are at the beginning of their cycles. I think the coming 10 years we'll continue seeing more of them, but definitely every now and then you have a flavor of the day. So that's also interesting to keep an eye on.
What are some of the imminent growth challenges for the Middle East in the startup ecosystem? What are the key components for an ideal ecosystem?
I mean, I guess Walid has touched upon the importance of talent and talent build-up. I think without it, it'll be very difficult to develop successful homegrown companies and actually by develop at scale and in numbers. So it's not enough to do 1, 2, 10 companies. If you want to really transform the economy, you need a whole generation of entrepreneurs, engineers, marketeers, etc. And those have to be trained. So not necessarily just educated, but educated and trained to be able to make a difference. I see this as the biggest challenge. Really, is the human element and its readiness and its knowledge. For me, the rest, whether it's legal or financial or something else, can be really fixed or dealt with. The talent question is, in my opinion, the most difficult to solve.
I believe this region, similar to the global COVID problem. This was the biggest challenge that we've lived in the past 2-3 years, and thankfully, this became an opportunity to digitize many other sectors. Mostly 2 very traditional sectors that were not digitized yet, which were healthcare and education. Many founders saw this opportunity to digitize these sectors, and many startups grew tremendously during the past 2-3 years. Although it was a challenge, COVID, they took advantage of it and saw an opportunity and benefited from it.
A trend in the market that everyone seems to have missed?
Okay, I don't think that people really miss out. There are sometimes laggers in adoption. We were talking about crypto and blockchain as examples. How a few years ago, very few people believed in them, understood them, and then today you seem to have everyone really wanting to be in those sectors. I go back to the original idea. There's big chunks of the economy that haven't been properly digitized. So we speak about healthcare or education as 2 examples. When you look at the size of the opportunities and how, if I may say, offline there still are in our part of the world, or how very few software and internet companies have been participating in those economies, you definitely see a big arbitrage. In healthcare, for instance, very few health tech companies have scaled. In education as well, very few ed tech companies have any meaningful scale for sectors that fundamentally would benefit from digital adoption and digital disruption. We can talk about other examples as well, but I see these two as the most obvious.
According to reports, VC funding to women-led startups is still insignificant. What needs to change, and what are you doing?
True innovation usually comes from those accelerators and incubators and engineering schools and labs. And unfortunately, the female participation there is on the low side. So when they start their companies and come for funding, the funnel is quite limited, unfortunately. So what we're doing is giving the chance to every woman founder and entrepreneur to meet with us, and we advise them. We've been quite proactive in that. We've participated as well in a lot of business plan competitions. We've organized some, participated as judges, and favored women participation in those sectors. In our portfolio today, there are 15% of women entrepreneurs as part of our 60+ companies, so it's barely 8 of them.
Give us your insight on a few high-profile companies that went public in the region. What does this indicate for the industry?
So there's been very few companies in the tech space that actually went public in the MENA region. We happen to have been backing the first one that actually went public on NASDAQ, company called Anghami, which was the first actually tech company in the Arab world to go public on NASDAQ. And previous to that, there's been few examples of companies going public in local markets, such as Egypt or regional markets. And the experience with Anghami has been great because so far the IPO has lived to its initial price and expectations, and there's been an interesting learning curve for everyone involved in this journey. Now, I suspect to be more companies going public. I'm not personally a public equity expert, but I tend to observe that there are also challenges and ways of dealing with companies when they go public. I personally try to focus on results and long-term value behind those companies, and not less on whether a stock is performing on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. And that comes from the fact that VC is also called patient capital, so we can stay in a company for a decade and not exit, and the company will still be growing. We don't look at daily we're not daily traders or weekly traders. But I go back to this idea that public markets are a very important piece of the funding cycle because they come toward the end and they provide exit liquidity options to investors. They allow the general public to participate, and they elevate the governance and the standards and the profile of companies. So when a company goes public, becomes more visible, have access to debt options, talent, people, suppliers, clients would want to, also recognize that this is a big milestone. I hope we'll see more of the Anghamis, honestly, in this part of the world.
In investment, does the go big or go home mentality still work?
I think as an entrepreneur, you have to have this mentality, especially if you're working with disruption and digital, and you're going after VC money, because VC money looks for high returns, high risk, high returns. So it's very, very difficult to achieve high returns if you don't have a go big mentality or think big mentality or execute big strategy, because you won't have the returns, the high returns that we're all looking for. So I think it's important for entrepreneurs. For investors, I think it's important to believe and support and back and help in this process.
A piece of advice you would give an entrepreneur?
Have fun.
I always say, if you want to dream big,